My name is Jason Mendez, and I'm the Director of Supplier Strategy at Crux. Today, we'll be relaunching the Crux Supplier Spotlight, a series where we highlight members of the Crux Supplier Network with unique data sets, an innovative approach to traditional data sets, or data that serves an essential core category crucial for data consumers. Today, we'll be meeting with Denominator, a recent addition to the Crux network of suppliers that has data geared towards the ESG consumer. I'd like to introduce Anders from Denominator. Please introduce yourself, actually, and why don't you tell us a bit about your company and your data products?
No, thank you very much for having me, Jason. And yeah, I have a little bit of an accent, which means that I'm originally from Denmark and Sweden, but live in the US. But yeah, I'm the CEO of Denominator, and I've always worked with data in many different areas. And that's also why I can say Denominator's data is quite unique in the market, to say it mildly, because yeah, we focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion on a global level. So you can think about Denominator as a global database covering all countries and more than 2 million companies now, actually, both private and public. And on these companies, we then collect a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI data. And we also score and rate that data. I think what is an important point to make here, then when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that means different things in different parts of the world, which is also why in our database, we measure gender, we measure race, ethnicity, age, sexuality, disability, educational backgrounds. Do people have kids? Don't they have kids? Like all the things that make us all unique and think differently is really what we're measuring on either the executive level, the board level, middle management, all employees, and even countries. So there's a lot of data, but it is very unique in the sense that it's truly global, all industries, and then the granularity of the DEI dimensions.
All right, great. Thanks for that introduction. And since so many of our customers and prospective clients, and I'm sure this is also true for you as well, are interested in integrating that ESG data into a wider platform, what are some of the ways that you help them match your company data to their internal company databases?
Yeah, but that's of course why we're very happy to be on the Crux platform, because yeah, as we see it, Crux is solving sort of the challenges of bringing in external data or linking external data into various environments. And that's essentially what we need to do, because we have a unique specialized data set and it has many applications, which is also very interesting, but it also creates the challenges of, for this data to bring value, it needs to be linked to other data so we can start deriving the correlation analysis and the insights. One example of where the data is being used is in ESG investment or sustainable finance, where a lot of traditional ESG data essentially is e-data, is focused on the environment, but there's very limited on the social piece and on the human capital or diversity, equity, and inclusion. But again, in order to do a portfolio analysis and seeing how have we actually invested our money from a DEI perspective, we need to link the DEI data first, and that's why it's great to partner with Crux.
Great, thank you for that. Is there anything else that is unique to the Denominator that you would like to highlight, or anything else that we should know about your team and the offerings that you have?
Yeah, no, I think within the ESG area, there's been a large focus on the environmental piece. So it's really around water, biodiversity, or carbon emissions. But the S and to some degree the G has sort of been overlooked. And this is really where the Denominator data is very unique and fits in. And we can do things today that we couldn't even do a few years ago, because if you think about scope 3 emission data that everyone is talking about, trying to monitor their emissions in their supply chains, this is now also going into DEI. Like, one thing is to fix the DEI internally, and we have many DEI officers working inside companies and trying to fix it for companies' employees, but the impact is then limited to the employees of that company. Once you start pushing that into supply chains and looking at your 10,000 suppliers or 50,000 suppliers, how are they doing? What dimensions are they good at? Where are they lagging behind? Do you need to focus on gender? Do you need to focus on race, ethnicity, or is it disability? This is where we can start really having a much wider impact as companies, but also as I mentioned in the investment community, where again, being able to allocate funds to companies that are performing well on some of these metrics, or screen out those that are performing badly. So in the investment community, we see a lot in ESG investment or just ethical investment. Most people don't want to invest in companies that produce landmines because of all the downstream damages that causes. But again, why should a minority woman not be able to say, I don't want my money to go to companies that do not treat women or minorities well. Or the same, if disability or sexuality is your focus areas, why can't you allocate money to companies that are doing well, or again, take it away from companies that are not? So I think that's the unique piece. There is this new unique data that allows for many new use cases that, again, wasn't possible 3 or more years ago.
Well, you bring up something very interesting, and it's also very interesting to Crux, the use cases of ESG data outside of the traditional investment process and also for other industries. How much focus are you getting or interest are you getting outside of financial services for people who would like to better screen their suppliers, to do supply chain planning, or at least to rate and scorecard some of their vendor partners?
Yeah, so I think this is where, again, I've worked a lot in supply chain, more from the financial risk and from cyber risk and sanctions. Those are sort of more the traditional areas. But with Scope 3 emission data and sort of the exercise of understanding the emissions in the supply chain, many are taking the opportunity now to also see what other impact can we actually have with our purchasing power. And to your question, I think this is where this is not just the financial community. This is really especially consumer companies, because that's where this is even more important with the new generations of buyers. And it's important to see that the companies that they buy from taking a sustainable approach, not just to their own company, but also to how they produce the goods. And that's where the supply chain becomes key. So it's everything from manufacturing companies to service companies to literally every type of corporation that are starting to look at the supply chain as well.
Well, one of the things that I'm sure is, a very challenging thing for data consumers, especially something like DEI data, is DEI can mean different things in different countries. The United States is a very diverse country, but even the states within the United States have a different amount of diversity depending on where you go. Alaska, of course, very different from Texas and California. So Denmark and the United States are also very different. So tell us a bit about how you approach the DEI data between countries and help people get really valuable insights, but also objective insights about the companies they're evaluating and where they operate.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, because it is really an important thing to cover, because diversity and inclusion in historically some areas, they only focus on one or two of those dimensions of what diversity, equity, inclusion actually is, because there is many things that makes us all unique and diverse. So gender is, of course, one of the big ones, and that applies all over the world. Race ethnicity is very big in the US, as it should be. I'm originally from Denmark and Sweden. Here, race ethnicity is not at the top of the agenda because the populations are so homogeneous. But it's really important to essentially have a holistic approach to diversity and inclusion, which is why we measure on gender, age, nationalities, educational backgrounds, disability, sexuality. The list really goes on, because that way we're able to look into the unique local context of where companies operate. This is also the type of thing that is really important when you then start wanting to compare companies' performance cross-border. Because how do you do that when, as you mentioned, things are different in Alaska and that it is in California or Texas or the United States and Denmark? And race ethnicity is a good example. I really don't do anything to increase the diversity if I join a board or leadership in a Danish company. But if I did that in Uganda, I would increase the diversity. So how do we come up with meaningful measurements? We can't just look at the raw data. We often have to turn it into scores. So this is where we actually use macro level data to calibrate these scores and come up with a meaningful way of seeing how well a company is performing on race, ethnicity, age, gender, and all the other dimensions. And if we use the race ethnicity example still, if you had a company that only operated in the US, that had 100% Caucasian leadership, and one company that only operated in Denmark that had 100% Caucasian leadership, the Danish company would get a higher score because the Danish population is more Caucasian than the US. So it's really around calibrating and understanding how well aligned are companies to the areas where they operate and the customers and employees they have.
Okay, great. Well, it's been great speaking with you. And why don't you tell everyone out there how they can reach the Denominator?
We're always here. We're very passionate about data, diversity, equity, inclusion. We have a very global and diverse team. So feel free to reach out on www.denominator.one, and that is ONE, or LinkedIn. Again, we also have info@denominator.one. Any type of channels, we're here, and we love to talk about the diversity, equity, inclusion, and data, and how you can score and compare the things.
All right, great, Anders. Well, it was great talking to you.
Likewise, Jason, thank you very much for having us.